Okay. And if you ever have a question about like content or clarification, please feel free to ask. I'm gonna be recording you, audio recording, just for the research purposes. Okay. So first question: do you think there is a relationship between your socioeconomic status and the education you receive?
Yeah.
For sure.
Hell yeah.
Formal English.
Formal language. Okay.
Formal,
yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Can you describe it, like individually?
Are you gonna pick which person goes first?
No, you can. It's just a conversation. Let's have a
well-
conversation.
Alright, so let's just sound like a commitment. We can
I
look
think
each other one.
thing like for me, since like I went to very much like a neighborhood that was full of like lower class to lower middle class people. Like you could see that the education system was pretty different. Like we were like underfunded in some spots. We didn't have enough teachers that necessarily were able to like help with the needs of the community. Like in my area, neighborhood area, there's a lot of a lot of kids that came in not being able to speak English. So sometimes it was hard to have like teachers that could specialized in helping those type of kids out. And once you fall behind, I think like the earlier you fall behind, the harder it is to catch up with like in other school systems where you start off already knowing English and already being able to do all the work that's assigned to you. So.
I don't know. My, like, where I grew up, it was, I would say, like, very solid, like, middle, like, upper middle class sort of area. And that was very, like, directly seen in the school system, too, because we always had, like, the new smart boards and, like, just technology that I think was sort of novelty even sometimes. But you could also see where the neighborhoods that were better off, that were, sort of near us, sort of the disparity between like the prestige of programs, like even though we had really good school programs, we weren't like renowned in X, Y, and Z. That like even just a slightly different tax bracket above us had, I guess.
And I don't want to sound like a broken record of what my peer just said, but since I also grew up in the same sort of situation as he did, most of the stuff he did say kind of nail on point of all the stuff that you grew up in this sort of situation because socioeconomic class only permitted you to go this way. So like your socioeconomic class only gave you a limited range of social like mobility to get out of the education system that you were in there. And those who could not just stayed in there and had to be in this education and had to follow along. But really what got me, as you kind of pointed out, was that like you could see if you were better off or not. And sometimes the better off kind of like was explained by the people you talk to in different conferences, especially you go from a regional conference and there's people from different schools and you say where you're from, and they kind of explain saying like, oh, you're from that school.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that already that connotation saying that you just came from that area, which is better off, least accessible for all the stuff that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of those conversations came up with that you were seen as, how would I say it? People coming from that area are seen as like
you can see the disparities basically.
you can see the disparities, and sometimes you can even tell the person that they came from there.
Were you looked down?
I don't. The thing is,
You weren't really
since
looked
we
down.
lived in like Wyandotte County, it was an area that was fairly like poor and very like concentrated with like Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians. Going to school, you didn't know, like you didn't have a standard to compare it to. So like since the whole school system was pretty poor, you never felt like there was a difference. You just said, oh, this is how the school system actually is and stuff like that. It's only when you went to like other conferences with other schools, like in Johnson County, where you realize like that those disparities sort of existed, and that only happens when like people get like older. I don't think as kids we necessarily thought that like we were like disadvantaged in the school systems just because everyone around us was the same as us.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have like a standard until like, and also to ask you like, were you looked down upon? Every time I say like I'm from the dot, people are like, oh, you're from there. So like they give you like this connotation like, oh, you grew up with the bad side, or you grew up in the side that
The less
doesn't have
educated
much.
side,
Yeah.
sort of.
So I grew up in Cherokee County, Oklahoma, and they hadn't really been, I would say, as disadvantaged as they were in like my parents' generation. Like then they were still setting up like housing districts and like different common like welfare sort of things, but we were still like a poverty area in the sense that like teachers were paid. If they worked there for 5 years, their like tuition got paid. So we had a lot of teachers at first, and then once they get good, once 5 years ends, they'll leave. So our education system was always like seeming like it was going to rear up, but like there was no like educated teachers in the sense. There were definite disparities in the sense that, like, when I got to high school, the education system split. So Cherokee Nation paid for their own high school, and theirs was funded entirely on like their own funds, and then and federal funds, I guess. And then there was the non-Cherokee high school that was just on Oklahoma funds, and that one we started seeing disparities because we were classmates at the beginning, and then when you make that split into high school, like all of a sudden they have like new laptops and MacBooks, and there's like this envy that's immediately bred towards like the Cherokee Nation between like non-Cherokees, and that was really evident in like high school age.
Yeah. I think we can relate to that too. Like, we also had teachers that would come in that were fairly new, and then as they got adjusted to stuff, they would move like to the county right next to us because they would get like
A better
paid
job.
more and stuff like that. So the only people that really stayed there that kept being teachers were like either teachers that have family or that like grew up in that area, and then the other teachers were like just there for a couple years, and then they switched to get better paying jobs. Yeah.
Waiting until the new payroll.
Maybe. Or maybe they just get a better position at the end of the day.
So do you guys think, I don't know, is anyone here from a private school?
Yeet.
Do you guys think there's a difference between the education you receive in a private school and in a public school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In what ways is it different? Like, you don't think?
I don't think so. I don't think that there was a big difference between the two for me.
Is it Fisher age?
Yeah, we grew up. There was a couple of private schools that were there that were in that same neighborhood, and oftentimes like those private schools seem to get like a lot more stuff than us just because they had like private funding, so they had more sports teams, like different fields they could play on, and you could tell like when a person was from a private school versus like the public school system in that area.
I'd say there was just, but probably not like if they were from the same area. Like I didn't have private schools in my town, but like the next biggest town had some.
Okay.
But I would say there weren't like major disparities between like that town's like private and public schools.
Okay, so moving on from that, what do you consider quality education is? What things does a quality education have? What defines quality, basically?
It has to prepare you for where you're going. It doesn't necessarily have to be college if that's not what your like goal is, but you have to be like ready to take the next step and to be able to continue learning outside of like basic elementary classroom setting, I think.
I think like a quality education is that, you know, what I'm thinking about, like, how do I define my education? You know, what I went to was like, it taught me what I need to know, but like at the same time, like, it wasn't equitable. Like, I can say that my quality of education I had through my school was better than the district that I was in, just because my school was a little bit more like
It was a magnet school.
It was a magnet school, so it, you know, already kind of wanted you to prepare that. But when I compared it with my other schools in the same district, you know, the quality there is just terrible, because you always compare yourself, you always compare the quality that you have with the person you have it better with. So the quality of school, of education really is that you don't look at another district, another county and say that, oh, they have it better with me. You say that, oh, they have challenging courses to the same extent as I am,
So therefore, we have the same advantage as together because we get the same education at the end of the day. It promotes like academic rigor. It promotes a sort of like sense of establishment of you being prone and having a good education system. You're not having a good education system if you say that the quality of your education is less than the one you have next to yourself.
Yeah, I think for me, the definition of like having a good quality like educational system is making sure like that the facilities, like the schools, have the required resources to help the kids out that they need. Like for example, going back, like oftentimes the high school that I went to, we only had like one field that we would play baseball, soccer, football in, and we didn't have any like pools or anything like that. And we didn't have enough money to really renovate any of like the aging equipment that we had. Versus like other schools like in Johnson County, where you had like schools that had like three different fields, like one for their baseball team, one for their soccer team, one for their football team. They had like two theaters and stuff like that. So um, equitable like education, I think, would be having enough resources for the students that like the teachers get paid well enough so they can provide like all the assistance the students need, but also have like the physical necessities to allow more opportunities for those students to be there.
I would say probably like teacher pay has a big portion of it because they are going to be the people that are going to be directly like teaching. And if they're not happy with their job, they're going to make it evident to the children at some point that they're not happy with it, which is going to have a major impact on their education. And beyond that, like resources, textbooks, any learning materials. If you're learning stuff that was like 40 years ago, then you're not going to be in the same boat as someone learning something now.
Oh wow, they haven't talked about evolution in this textbook. Oh, it was made in 7 days?
Birth control's a thing. Wow.
Yeah.
The country of Israel just got founded.
Oh god. So going off a little bit with that, do you think your schools, the schools that you went to, prepared you for being a citizen or moving upwards, or like prepare you for being the best version of yourself?
Probably like not. In my case, like even like Raul stated that our school was a magnet school, so it like handpicked the students that would go there from the rest of the district, which made it like a little bit better. There was still a high percentage of people that didn't necessarily like go to college or dropped out because they were kicked out of that school, and there wasn't really a strong sense of like civic duty or anything like that. It didn't teach us much about how like society works in general, or it never did anything to instill like a passion in its students.
Of national, no, not to say nationalism, I'm like,
Not nationalism, but like
I guess
what to do if you're like an adult or stuff like that. And a lot of it also had to do with the fact that like I'll touch like on the point that she brought up, that there needs to be like some form of like family or parent involvement in the school system. And like for us, that at least while I was there in high school, we never had like any parent oversight or no group of parents that would come to any of the meetings to discuss like the quality of education that their children were receiving. So I don't feel like the my high school and even like the high school in the district that we were at prepared us that well for college, because or in life generally, even some of the people that come to college from that school system, they end up like flunking out or leaving after doing 1 year.
I think that my whole district was very focused on being good students, more than anything else. Our big focus was just numbers of kids that get into XYZ colleges, and percentages of kids going to school, and I mean an extremely low dropout rate. Like it was more numbers than anything else, I think, for them.
Right. So did it did you feel like valued as an individual, like you were making a contribution?
I mean, yes, because I think that part of like that system is like you have to have the teachers that are dedicated to teaching the students. So I think that like because the teachers were happy, like because they had the funding that would help us get to where the school wanted us to be, like we felt valued. But at the same token, you could kind of see like the game that they had going, if that makes sense. Like on the individual level, it was okay, but on the wider level, you could see like you kind of see past, I guess, the you can do it. Like, we can do it, you know.
Right.
I would say they made a really big push my junior and senior year because they realized that like most of the the high school graduates were not going to college. They made a bigger push of like retention. They changed their sick day policy to where like if you didn't miss a day or like between 0 to 3 days, you could skip finals week.
Wow.
So they like
Okay,
that
so
that
just
helped a
happened
lot.
here.
Just different little stuff like that. They also made a big push of like how to balance a like paycheck or like what government does, because a lot of the kids were going to the VOTech across the street, so they were learning like construction jobs rather than like they didn't need to know how to handle like their freshman college year because they weren't gonna have one.
It's also good that you pointed, and also that you also pointed out about like at the end of the day, what does school look for to get that sort of prestige? And our school definitely look at that. How many students at the end of the day are getting graduated? And it's very interesting. Like they kind of tweaked the word, saying that we had 100% or 95% rate that students went to college.
But that's because they got
That's because they had to, and that's because the students who didn't go
were kicked out.
were kicked out. So it was now became a requirement that you are allowed or you are required to at least apply to a couple colleges and say which colleges you're going to. So it looks like this school had just put down like a lot of prestige. And when I went to my sister's graduation, who's like 2 years younger than me, but they went to the same school as I did, I could see like, some students who say they were going to college, or some say they just were going to go to trade school, or some say just didn't want to do anything. And it's very interesting to see that dynamic when you like switch the gears from a perspective of from going to college to just graduating high school. And graduating high school is really the end point of, I guess, my education system, or like the end of where I grew up in. Once you graduate high school, at that point you're done for the day, because you don't really. I guess my school has not trained me in understanding the real world experience, but it only trained me to know that there's obstacles outside the world that one way or another you're gonna find it, and we're not gonna teach you how to do it. It's gonna come your way or another, and you gotta figure it out by yourself.
So going on for that, like, did you ever feel that your socioeconomic status was a disadvantage or an advantage for you within education?
I mean, with a socioeconomic status, it varies. I guess it varies that if you're permitted to use FAFSA, you're able to get a higher retain of federal aid. That's one thing. If you're able to get FAFSA, apply for FAFSA, you can get that site. That's if you go into college. But let's say the student's not going to college, which I know many of them. So then your socioeconomic status then limits your mobility of getting out of high school, or how much you can apply after high school. So, and it's very centered to how a student's socioeconomic class kind of affects the infrastructure. If the community reflects to have a high infrastructure or like a high socioeconomic class, then there's more resources, there's more equity around there, there's more opportunity for someone to attain some sort of good or service. If not, it's very limited. You either got to work in very corrupted manners to get what you need at the end of the day, and it's otherwise just a very a handicap if you don't have that high economic status, or just at the end of the day, a middle class economic status according to how your community or county sees it as.
Yeah, going off, I think it's definitely a disadvantage. especially being in that area where everyone was sort of like the same to lower middle class, high like lower class. Um, since there wasn't enough money to go around in the district, all the schools like education system was probably subpar. But like I said before, you never really realize how much of a hindrance it is until you like start, for me at least, comparing it to like other school systems or whatever. Like being in the same school system where everyone was the same, you sort of had no sense of like your socioeconomic status because you were like, oh, this is just like how school is, and there's no advantage or disadvantage. It's only once you get like out and start seeing what other people had that you start going like, oh, okay, so like your school had like this program or that program or this and that, and it could have made it definitely a lot easier for some individuals to like go to college or do well in school if they had like a higher socioeconomic status. So now I see it as a disadvantage, but while I was in high school, I didn't really have a big sense of it per se.
I'd say for me, there are like a lot of different factors that affect, like the socioeconomic factors like affect. For me, I had two parents who were both like professors at the college level, so that definitely played a factor of how well I did at homework, as opposed to like most of my friends like had parents who didn't finish high school or didn't finish college, and that does impact your grades significantly and how likely you perceive like your ability to go to like high school or college and finish.
I would say that being like where I was, it was pretty much expected that you would go to college, and I think that that does come a lot from like socioeconomic status. For no other reason than like that's what I would say more than a majority of the parents of like the students in my school system were professionals in some sense, and so it was just like expected of us that we pursue that as well because that's what success was to them.
Yeah, and I think like in our school district, like a cycle started for me where like if you were a parent, like you dropped out of high school or you didn't complete high school, and then you had a kid, and that kid grew up and tried to get like help from homework and stuff like that, or help on like how school works. It was hard because that parent couldn't help you, so you had to like do it all like on your own. Especially also since there's like a large migrant population where I live, their English skills is not the best. So trying like as a kid to get help from your parents or in various subjects wasn't an option. So you had to like do it on your own, and I feel like that definitely impacted the way like you did in school because it was much harder for you probably.
And also like your dedication to your family. Like sometimes it was the opposite. Like you train your parent in that situation to learn English or to know very basic mathematics skills. Every parent had a very limited education, so sometimes you had the obligation to help your family out.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on from that, a lot of people in the study, like in the surveys, said that most people, like 72% of the people, said that education, like schools, trump or frustrate creativity. Do you think that's bad?
Can you repeat?
Like for like a lot of schools, people believe that a lot of schools frustrate the creativity of an individual. Do you think that's bad?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if this is getting off topic, but like I mean, I think that like the fostering of creativity is something that's really important, especially like for producing like a wide range of like or like a diverse range of like fields that the students are going to go out and do. Because I mean, creativity is not just like personal, but like the more creative you are, like the varying like reach of like impact you can have, and like what type of job you can kind of create for yourself, I guess. But then it was also like while school, I guess, like hampers creativity, it was also something I think that my school was actually pretty good at at encouraging. Like there were
Mm-hmm.
enough like art classes and like music classes, even like cooking, like stuff like that that we could participate in that was not like a hindrance to like our graduating.
Mm-hmm.
And like it was funded. Like it wasn't ever like a big issue, I guess. That like it wasn't available.
Mm-hmm. Right, but do you think like classes, like not just the offering of classes, but the way they are taught, promote you to think outside the box? Like, were you just instructed to, here is problem A, here is how you solve problem A. Let's continue to solve problem B, or was it more like, here's problem A, solve it? Were you spoon-fed the information, or were you encouraged to be creative in the information, the knowledge that you gain, the ways that you solve problems?
I think very interesting subject.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like when I got into like later junior senior year, I mean, some like rigorous like very stable like subject courses like mathematics, physics were very limited to how much you can get for range of like creativity. Although they do require that you have to think outside the box, it was just very spoon fed, as you said. But when it comes to like courses like English or courses that require more sense of the individual self, they require that. I do know that I was in the international baccalaureate program, and one thing they kind of, harp on was creativity. So especially the social sciences, the humanities courses itself, they were taught on there in my school. They kind of wanted to have the creativity component that that they asked for that, and they did see it as being a big beneficial for students like growth.
Yeah, I guess I sort of like half agree with this because definitely courses in the United States generally, the way I see it, are very like spoon fed, where they give you this and they tell you like, okay, memorize this. However, I also feel that the school system can also be conducive to like creativity, especially if you have like necessarily like a population that doesn't know a lot about like mathematics or like English. School, I think, is very important in getting you to be like necessarily like read or get you like culture and stuff you wouldn't read on a regular basis. And different programs like having like a theater program or having like multiple like music programs can definitely help develop that creative drive. Like for example, like due to budget cuts, like our school didn't have a theater program. So people, if they wanted to have that aspiration and that like creativity, couldn't do it at our high school anymore, just because the theater program got canceled and didn't exist. Versus another school that might have more money to allow those creative people outlets to express themselves. So I sort of agree and then like disagree with that statement in that manner.
They almost tried taking our piano away.
Yeah.
I would agree with that it was very like limited where I was. It was definitely something that was pointed towards like, okay, you solved it this way, but that's not the way that we solved it, so it's wrong. In a lot of the classes, especially like math and science, which kind of like fosters the thought of like whenever you leave like high school and elementary school that like, there's only one solution to each of these problems, which is not all the way that it is. It definitely does get like a linear thought develop like in students' minds.
Then you get into calculus, and then nothing mattered. Then there's 4 options for one answer.
If you lived in a perfect world where you chose the content of your classes, oh my god, I'm sorry. The content of your classes, what classes to take, which would have been your program? Like, what classes would you have chosen to take? What would you have wanted to learn about? Keep in mind this is 1st grade to 12th grade.
Oh, in physics, 1st grade.
I mean, not necessarily when did you want to learn it, but what would you have wanted to learn that you would be like, as an adult now,